My name is Amelia Wren. I grew up in the misty green lap of Oregon, in a small house where the scent of rain-soaked earth and my mother's chamomile tea were the twin pillars of my childhood. For the past 15 years, I have lived and worked in places most people only know from headlines, places of dust and drought, of quiet courage and unspeakable loss. My life has been a tapestry woven from threads of whispered languages, the weight of a child's hand in mine, and the steady, humbling rhythm of a world far removed from the one I left behind. I returned for my 20-year high school reunion wearing a simple, gray linen dress I'd bought in a market in Amman. It was comfortable, familiar, and within 5 minutes of my arrival at the Silverwood Vineyard and Inn, I was reminded that in their eyes, it marked me as someone who had never quite arrived at all. The inn was a sprawling ode to rustic wealth, its great hall built from reclaimed timber and river stone. Fairy lights were strung through the gnarled branches of ancient oak trees, casting a soft, forgiving glow on the faces of people I once knew. I stepped out of the taxi and the evening air, cool and damp with the promise of more rain, felt like a welcome home. Inside, however, the warmth was manufactured, fueled by expensive wine and the glittering heat of ambition. The hum of conversation was a symphony of curated success. I could hear names of prestigious firms, talk of stock options and European holidays, the clinking of glasses a percussive beat beneath it all. A woman at the check-in table, her smile perfectly polished, handed me a name tag. Amelia Wren. The font was plain, unadorned. It felt less like a name and more like a placeholder. My younger sister, Isabel, was already holding court. She stood near the massive stone fireplace, a vision in a silk dress the color of champagne, her laughter echoing with an easy, practiced charisma. She had built an empire on the concept of living a radiant life, her brand, Aura, a global phenomenon of wellness blogs, best-selling books, and retreats that promised inner peace for a significant outer price. And I truly believe that we all have the power to manifest our own reality, she was saying to a rapt audience. It's about clarity, intention, and never being afraid to take up space. She caught my eye then, her smile widening just a fraction. Of course, I have to thank my sister, Amelia, who is with us tonight. She has always reminded me that there are many paths in life, even the quiet ones. The group turned to look at me, their expressions a polite, uncurious blend of pity and confusion. It was Izzy's signature move, a compliment that doubled as a dismissal. I offered a small, quiet smile and found my name at a table in the back, near the clatter of the catering station and a door that led to the gardens. The tables nearer the front, where Izzy sat, were decorated with elaborate floral centerpieces and hand-calligraphed place cards. Dr. Evan Carter, Chief of Surgery. Anya Sharma, Tech CEO. Leo Vance, Sterling Financial. Isabel Wren. I sat down, the worn linen of my dress a stark contrast to the crisp white tablecloth. Across the room, Leo Vance saw me. 20 years had sharpened the angles of his face, but hadn't softened the restless energy in his eyes. He still looked like a man perpetually on his way to somewhere more important. He navigated the tables with the easy grace of someone who knew he belonged, a glass of dark red wine in his hand. Amelia, he said, his voice a smooth baritone that pulled me back 2 decades. I almost didn't recognize you. Still traveling the world with a backpack. Something like that, I said, my voice even. It's good to see you, Leo. He leaned against the table, his suit jacket pulling taut across his shoulders. I'm just surprised. You were on the fast track. Valedictorian, debate champion, that big scholarship to Georgetown for international policy. What happened? Before I could formulate an answer that felt both true and simple, a woman beside him, draped in diamonds that caught the firelight, whispered to her companion, loud enough for the sound to carry. Didn't she just disappear? I heard she works for some little charity now. A shame. All that potential. From a few tables away, a woman named Clara Hayes met my gaze. She'd been a quiet, artistic girl in high school, and she still had that same observant, gentle quality about her. She offered a faint, sympathetic smile. I returned it, a silent acknowledgement of the shared space we occupied on the fringes of this glittering display. The evening wore on. Speeches were made, toasts were raised. Izzy came by my table eventually, all performative warmth and sibling affection. "Oh, Ames, I'm so glad you came," she said, bending to give me an air kiss that smelled of expensive perfume. "I was worried you wouldn't. That dress is, so you. Beautifully simple." "It's just a dress, Izzy," I replied. "Of course," she said, tilting her head. "You were never one for fuss. You know, we should really catch up. I'm sure you have so many interesting little stories." "Only the ones that don't make for good branding," I said quietly. Her smile tightened for a barest second before relaxing back into its default radiance. She turned away, drawn back toward the magnetic pull of the room's center, leaving me in the quiet eddy of her wake. Later, Leo returned, this time with a small entourage of former jocks turned finance brothers. One of them, a man with a sunburn and a booming laugh, squinted at my name tag. "Ren, wait, weren't you the one who was going to, solve world hunger or something?" he slurred, gesturing with his beer. "So, what do you do? Hand out soup in a church basement?" Several people chuckled. Leo looked on, an amused smirk playing on his lips. Izzy, standing nearby, simply watched, her expression unreadable. I took a slow sip of water. The glass was cool and solid in my hand. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, the carefully constructed bonhomie fraying at the edges. For a moment, I was transported back to a different kind of heat, the dry air of a makeshift clinic in the Avari Valley, the weight of a child's feverish body in my arms, the quiet determination of a life hanging in the balance. These people, with their polished lives and casual cruelties, knew nothing of that world. They saw a woman in a plain dress who had failed to live up to their definition of success. I stood up, the legs of my chair scraping softly against the floor. I looked at the man who'd spoken, at Leo, at the circle of expectant faces. Then I glanced across the room at my sister. Her mask was perfect. I smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Something like that," I said again. Then I turned and walked toward the glass doors that led out into the night. They saw a woman who had faded into obscurity. But in that obscurity, I had found a purpose more profound than any spotlight they could ever cast. The cool, damp air of the Oregon night was a balm. I walked past the manicured lawns and the flickering tiki torches toward the dark, orderly rows of grapevines. The mist hung low over the valley, muffling the sounds of the party behind me, leaving only the scent of wet earth and sleeping leaves. This was a silence I understood. It wasn't empty, it was full of life, just a different, quieter kind. Inside, the party continued its performance. From this distance, the laughter sounded brittle, the music thin. I saw Izzy through the large picture window, now standing on a low stage, accepting an Alumni of the Decade award. Her posture was perfect, her gratitude eloquent. The door behind me opened with a soft whoosh. "Leo. There you are," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of its audience. "You always did have a habit of vanishing." I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on the distant lights of the town nestled in the valley below. He came to stand beside me, leaning against the railing. The scent of his wine and expensive cologne felt alien in the clean night air. "You know," he began, his tone attempting casualness, "I really thought we had a future. Back then. Before you took that scholarship and then just dropped off the map. You were going to be an ambassador, a diplomat. You were going to change the world from the inside. Then you threw it all away to, what? Dig wells in Africa." His laugh was short, sharp with disbelief. It was the same argument we'd had 20 years ago, in a sterile dorm room that smelled of old books and anxiety. I just told him I was deferring my spot at Georgetown to join a small, grassroots NGO for a 2-year placement in East Timor. "You're what?" he'd asked, his face a mask of incredulity. "Amelia, that's career suicide. You're throwing away everything you've worked for." "It's not throwing it away, Leo," I had tried to explain. "It's starting from the ground up. I need to understand the world before I try to change it." "Yeah, well, some of us don't have time for a 2-year field trip," he'd snapped. He'd walked out that night, and our shared future had dissolved with the closing of the door. Now, 2 decades later, he was still standing on the same side of that argument, still measuring my life against a yardstick I had long since discarded. I didn't vanish, Leo, I said, my voice as calm as the misty air. I just went where I was needed. He scoffed. Always so noble. So cryptic. He reached out, his hand gently closing around my arm. It was a gesture meant to be reassuring, but it felt like an anchor. You could have been someone, Amelia. Truly someone. I finally turned to look at him, at his handsome, unlined face, at the faint disappointment in his eyes. I am someone, I said softly. Just not the someone you would recognize. Before he could reply, the door opened again. It was Izzy, her award, a small, glittering crystal obelisk, clutched in her hand. Leo, there you are, she called, her voice bright and brittle. They're doing the then and now slideshow. We have to see our terrible prom photo. Her eyes landed on me, and her smile became a little more fixed. Oh, Amelia. I didn't realize you were still here. I thought you might have slipped away. You always did hate being the center of attention. Leo dropped his hand from my arm as if it were suddenly hot. Izzy looped her arm through his, a seamless, proprietary gesture. Anyway, she continued, picking a microscopic piece of lint from his lapel, everyone is dying to hear about your new fund. Our class's most brilliant financial mind and its most radiant lifestyle guru. She laughed, a sound like tiny bells, but her glance at me was sharp. We make quite the pair, don't we? Leo, caught in her orbit, managed a slightly flustered smile. Izzy's gaze returned to me, a flicker of something, was it challenge, in their depths. And what about you, Amelia? What are you up to these days? Still between projects. I'm in transition, I said, the words feeling both true and wholly inadequate. Oh, she said, her voice dripping with practiced concern. Well, I hope everything works out for you. It's a tough world out there if you don't have a strong personal brand. She turned, tugging Leo with her. Come on, darling. The past awaits. Her heels clicked a sharp, victorious rhythm on the stone patio as they disappeared back inside. I stayed for a moment longer, letting the quiet of the vineyard settle over me again. I wasn't angry. Anger was a luxury I'd learned to live without. It burned too much precious energy. I was just weary. Weary of their small, cramped definitions of a meaningful life. I re-entered the hall, the warmth and noise washing over me again. The formal part of the evening was over, and people were mingling in loose, alcohol-fueled clusters. Clara found me near the now-deserted buffet table. She was holding a glass of white wine, her expression thoughtful. That was hard to watch, she murmured. I gave her a faint smile. Which part? All of it, she said, then added, for what it's worth, you look more at peace than anyone else in this room. I doubt they see it that way. It doesn't matter what they see, she said firmly. Truth doesn't need an audience. I felt a surge of gratitude for her simple, unvarnished kindness. Across the room, Izzy was laughing at something Leo had whispered in her ear. When she saw me watching, she didn't look away. She raised her glass in a mock toast, her smile a brilliant, impenetrable shield. She used to follow you around like a lost puppy, Clara remembered aloud. She learned to run ahead of me instead, I said. Before Clara could respond, a gentle hand touched my shoulder. I turned to see Mr. Henderson, my old AP World History teacher. He was grayer now, his face lined with the gentle creases of a man who had smiled often, but his eyes held the same keen, intelligent spark I remembered. Amelia Wren, he said, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. I was hoping I'd see you. I've tried to follow your work over the years, what little I could find. The Sahel, Southeast Asia, you've been busy. I was taken aback. You remember? Of course I remember, he said with a wry smile. You wrote a paper for my class on the socio-economic impact of grassroots aid organizations. Argued that real change doesn't come from top-down policy, but from empowering local communities. It was brilliant. Ahead of its time. He leaned in a little, his voice dropping. Tell me, were you ever involved with the Meridian Foundation? I've heard whispers about their work in the Avari Valley. Remarkable, if true. They thought I had faded into nothing. In truth, I had simply stepped into a world where the work was everything, and the recognition was silence. And in that moment, talking to the one person who seemed to see the thread of continuity in my life, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps I hadn't been erased completely after all. I stood alone on the stone terrace, watching the last of the guests depart. The fairy lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the damp grass. The air was thick with the smell of rain and old wine, a scent that felt like a quiet conclusion. In their eyes, I had already left a footnote in the grand, glossy story of their lives. A quiet failure. A forgotten promise. The wind picked up, rustling the grape leaves with a sound like whispering. I thought of something I'd written in my journal years ago, sitting in a tent during a monsoon in Bangladesh. I don't need them to see me. I just need the work to be seen. I hadn't realized that one day, the two might become inseparable. It began as a low, distant hum, a vibration I felt more in the soles of my feet than heard with my ears. It grew steadily, cutting through the ambient quiet of the valley. A few of the staff, clearing tables inside, paused and looked up. A valet, bringing the last car around, shielded his eyes and peered into the darkness. Then the lights. Not the soft, golden glow of the inn, but sharp, focused beams slicing through the mist from the direction of the main road. The hum resolved into the purr of powerful engines. A motorcade of 3 black sedans, sleek and official, swept up the long driveway, their tires crunching on the gravel with an authority that silenced everything else. They pulled to a stop directly in front of the main entrance. The remaining guests and staff stared, their curiosity piqued. Someone muttered, "Is that the governor?" Izzy and Leo, who had been saying their prolonged goodbyes near the door, turned, their expressions a mixture of confusion and excitement. A photo opportunity, perhaps. The rear door of the lead car opened. A woman emerged, tall and poised, her silver hair coiled in an elegant chignon. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored dark blue suit. Her bearing was one of profound, unstated power. Even from a distance, I recognized her. Dr. Ananya Sharma, the UN's Special Envoy for Global Aid and Development. She didn't glance at the small, gawking crowd. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the terrace and landed on me. Without hesitation, she began walking in my direction, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the stone path. 2 aides, a man and a woman, followed a respectful pace behind her. I remained perfectly still, my hands resting on the cool, damp stone of the balustrade. The gray linen of my dress felt less like a statement of simplicity and more like the camouflage it had always been, a way to move through the world without drawing attention. A uniform of invisibility. Dr. Sharma stopped a few feet in front of me. Her face, which I had only ever seen on grainy satellite calls or in tense briefing rooms, was kinder in person, but no less formidable. She inclined her head, a gesture of profound respect that was both personal and official. The sound of the wind in the vines seemed to die down, as if the night itself were holding its breath. "Amelia," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the stillness, a faint, elegant British Indian accent shaping the words. "I apologize for the late hour and the dramatic entrance. We've only just landed in Portland. I had to come myself." Behind her, I could feel the collective gaze of the onlookers, a palpable wave of shock and confusion. I heard Leo's intake of breath, a sharp, surprised hiss. I saw Izzy take a half step back, her hand flying to her throat, her perfectly composed mask finally cracking. "Dr. Sharma," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "It's an honor. I wasn't expecting you." "The committee's decision was unanimous and immediate," she continued, as if we were the only 2 people there. She opened the leather portfolio one of her aides handed her. "The Avari Valley Initiative. The famine was averted, Amelia. The models you developed for rapid, localized resource distribution, they not only saved thousands of lives, they have created a new framework for crisis response worldwide." She paused, her dark eyes holding mine. "The board of the Global Beacon Foundation is proud to announce that you are this year's recipient of their highest honor. The award will be presented in Geneva next month." The words hung in the cool night air, each one a stone dropping into a silent pool. Global Beacon Award. The Nobel Prize of Humanitarian Work. I heard a small, choked sound. It was Izzy. Her face was pale, her champagne-colored dress suddenly looking garish under the harsh headlights of the cars. "No," she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. That's not possible." Leo stared, his mouth slightly agape, the wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. He looked from Dr. Sharma to me and back again, his mind visibly struggling to reconcile the woman in the plain gray dress with the name being spoken with such reverence. It was Clara who moved first. She stepped out from the shadows near the door, her face illuminated by a fierce, brilliant joy. "Oh, Amelia," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. Oh my God. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the quiet of the night or the hush of a party winding down. It was the profound, ringing silence of a reality being shattered and rebuilt in a single, stunning moment. Dr. Sharma handed me the portfolio. It was heavy, solid, real. "We need to debrief you on the next phase," she said, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "The political situation is delicate. Your insights are critical." I nodded, my throat tight. "Of course." As I turned to leave with her, I saw my sister's face. The carefully constructed radiance had crumbled, leaving behind something raw and exposed, a gaping chasm of disbelief and, beneath it, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fear. They had all spent the evening writing my story for me, a tale of quiet failure and squandered potential. But they had gotten the ending completely wrong. The sterile quiet of the hotel suite in Portland was a world away from the fragrant, misty air of the vineyard. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling, indifferent galaxy. Dr. Sharma and I had spent 2 hours going over satellite imagery and encrypted reports, my mind shifting easily back into the familiar gear of logistics, risk assessment, and human need. The reunion already felt like a strange dream. When she finally left, I sat for a long time in the silence, the leather-bound portfolio containing the award notification resting on the table. It wasn't a trophy. It was a responsibility. My phone buzzed, vibrating against the polished wood. It was a text from Clara. "Call me. It's important." I hesitated for a moment, then dialed. Her voice came through, low and urgent. "Amelia, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I had to tell you this. I just spoke to Leo." There was a pause. "He feels like a complete idiot, by the way. But that's not the point. He told me something about Izzy." I waited, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "Years ago," Clara continued, her voice tight with anger, right after we graduated. "You'd won that big national fellowship for young policymakers, the one that everyone assumed you'd take. But then you deferred to go to East Timor. Leo said Izzy went to the Alumni Association and the Fellowship Committee. She told them you'd had a change of heart, that you were taking a more unconventional path and wanted to be removed from their official honors list to avoid any pressure or expectation. She said she was protecting your privacy." The room suddenly felt very cold. "The narrative," I whispered. She was controlling the narrative. "It's worse than that," Clara said, her voice breaking slightly. "Leo said she showed them emails, supposedly from you, saying you were unreachable and wished to withdraw your name from consideration for any future accolades. She erased you, Amelia. Systematically. She made sure the world would see you exactly the way she wanted it to." I sank down onto the edge of the bed, the city lights blurring into a meaningless smear. It wasn't just passive dismissal or sibling rivalry. It had been a quiet, calculated campaign of erasure, waged for 2 decades. Another text message vibrated on the table. This one was from an unknown number, but I knew who it was from. "We need to talk. Please. Izzy." I looked at the portfolio on the table, then at the pleading words on my phone. I had thought my work was a shield. But I was learning that some battles cannot be fought from a distance. Sometimes, the only way to reclaim your story is to walk back into the heart of the fire and speak your own truth, in your own voice. The coffee shop was a small, neutral space downtown, all pale wood and the gentle hiss of an espresso machine. I chose a table in the back corner, a place to observe, a habit ingrained by years of needing to understand my surroundings before I acted. Izzy arrived looking like a ghost of her radiant self. She wore no makeup, and her usually perfect blonde hair was pulled back in a simple, messy knot. The vibrant armor of her aura brand was gone, leaving only my sister, looking younger and more fragile than I had seen her in years. She slid into the chair opposite me, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the mug of tea she'd bought. For a long time, the only sounds were the clink of ceramic and the low murmur of the city outside. "I didn't think you'd come," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "You asked me to," I replied, my own voice calm, devoid of accusation. That was the most important thing. I would not let her pull me into the maelstrom of her own creation. I would stay anchored in my own truth. She looked down at her hands. "When Dr. Sharma walked up to you, in that moment, my whole world just fractured. The story I'd been telling myself for 20 years, the one where I was the successful one, the one who shone, and you were the one who faded, it just turned to dust." I said nothing. I just listened. This was her confession, not my interrogation. "I was so proud of you, back then," she continued, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "You were brilliant. Everyone said so. You were going to be someone important. And I was just Izzy, the little sister. The pretty one. I lived in your shadow, Amelia. It was a wonderful, safe shadow, but I couldn't breathe in it." She finally looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, aching sorrow. "So I started to build my own light. Bright and loud and impossible to ignore. And the brighter I made it, the more I needed your shadow to be smaller, darker. I told myself I was protecting you from a world you didn't want. But I wasn't. I was protecting myself from you. From your quiet, unshakable purpose. It was so much more real than my manufactured radiance, and I couldn't stand it." She slid a small, worn photograph across the table. It was of the two of us, aged about 8 and 10, sitting on the porch swing of our childhood home. I was staring intently at a book in my lap, while Izzy was looking at me, her expression a complex mixture of admiration and envy that I was only now, 20 years later, able to understand. "I didn't want you to disappear," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to exist beside you." In that moment, all the anger, all the years of feeling dismissed and misunderstood, simply dissolved. It was replaced by a profound, aching sadness for the scared little girl who had felt so small that she had to shrink her own sister to feel tall. I reached across the table, my hand covering hers. Her skin was cold. She flinched, then relaxed into my touch, a shuddering sob escaping her lips. "Then maybe," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion, "it's time we both learned how." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was something more fragile and more fundamental. It was a beginning. A quiet clearing in the wreckage where something new and perhaps more honest could finally begin to grow. The ceremony in Geneva was a quiet, dignified affair. There were no flashing cameras or fawning crowds, just a room full of people whose life's work was dedicated to mending the broken pieces of the world. When they called my name, I walked to the podium not with a sense of triumph, but with a deep, grounding sense of gratitude. I spoke not of myself, but of the local doctors, the village elders, the mothers and fathers in the Avari Valley whose resilience and courage were the true story. Afterward, as I stood looking out over the placid, gray waters of Lake Geneva, a message came through on my phone. It was from Izzy. It wasn't an apology or a plea. It was a link to a new post on her blog. The title was "The Radiance of Silence." It was a raw, honest, and unflinching account of her own jealousy and insecurity. She wrote about the false dichotomies we create between loud success and quiet purpose. She announced she was shutting down the commercial aspects of her Aura brand and restructuring it as a foundation to support grassroots educational initiatives for girls in underserved communities. She ended the piece with a simple sentence: "My sister, Amelia Wren, spent 20 years teaching the world what it means to serve. She is finally teaching me." I stood there for a long time, the cool Swiss air on my face. The award in my hand felt light. The true weight, the one that mattered, was the feeling of a fractured bond beginning, ever so slowly, to mend. A few months later, I was back where I belonged, not in a grand hall, but in a dusty, sun-baked classroom in a newly established community center on the edge of the Sahel. The air was hot, thick with the smell of clay and chalk. I was teaching a group of young women, future community leaders, about sustainable agriculture. They were bright, fierce, and full of a hope that was as stubborn and resilient as the acacia trees that dotted the landscape. In their faces, I saw the future. I saw the real work. One afternoon, a package arrived with a supply truck. It was a book, its cover a simple, elegant design of a single, branching tree. It was titled The Space Between. The authors were listed as Isabel and Amelia Wren. Inside, on the title page, Izzy had written a short inscription. For the quiet ones. May your stories finally be heard. I smiled, a real, deep smile that reached my eyes. My name was known now, my story told. But I had not changed. I was still Amelia Wren. I was still here, on the ground, where the work was real and the need was great. I had found my voice not to shout, but to amplify the voices of others. And I finally understood that true strength wasn't about being seen, but about having the courage to see the world, and everyone in it, with an open and compassionate heart. The reunion had been a catalyst, a painful, necessary disruption. It had forced me to confront the ghosts of my past, but in doing so, it had cleared the path to a future I could share, not just with the world, but with my sister. And that, I realized, was a success more radiant than any I could have ever imagined.